Okay, I think we have some people coming in. And as you join us this evening, welcome. We're so happy to have you join our webinar this evening. If you'd like to open the chat and introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about who you are, maybe which languages you speak, or what school you attend, or your children attend, or if you're a community member, what programs do you support? Let us know who you are. And so you can open the chat, and I'll give everyone a minute to kind of be coming in, and we'll get started. Okay, let me see. Here we go. Okay, so just make sure you're in the right place. This evening's webinar is promoting student engagement for parents and community members. And with me this evening, I have some of our panelists and guests. We are partnering this webinar with the Coalition for Heritage Language Schools. And so I'm going to introduce my co-panelists with me and co-host with me this evening in just a moment. Before we start, I want to make sure everyone is aware of just a few things. I'm going to be sharing some links and resources with you throughout the webinar. So you'll have access to our social media links, where to go to find out more after the webinar. All of this is going to be for you in the chat, and we'll also be sharing it with you again as well after the webinar. You'll get an email with access to these things after the webinar. You're also, if you're interested in getting a certificate of attendance, you'll be able to do that after you complete a brief survey for us. There'll be a link there for you so you can access your certificate of attendance. You'll get an email tomorrow with a link to that as well. So just a few things for you to know. If there's something that you see in the chat or that Linda or Joy mentions this evening, you'll have access to all the things, okay? All right, so let me welcome our guest and co-panelists and speakers this evening. We have with us this evening Linda Egnatz, who is the Executive Director for the Global Seal of Biliteracy. Linda, we're so happy that you are joining us this evening. Let me see.
Thank you.
There, now they can see you when you're not muted. And we also have with us this evening Joy Peyton. Joy, we're so glad that you partnered with Avant More Learning to offer this webinar series for the coalition. And so thank you for working with us to provide this for services for your community.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Joy, would you like to start and share a little bit with our viewers about the coalition? And I will click through the slides for you, but I'm going to mute myself so I won't accidentally interrupt you. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much, Dawn, for coordinating this and bringing us in. And yes, as Dawn said, I'm Joy Peyton with the Coalition of Community-Based Heritage Language Schools. We were formed about 13 years ago, or that is, we formed about 13 years ago, with the purpose of making these community-based schools visible and a vital part of the language learning landscape, because they are a vital part of the language learning landscape, but they're often not visible. They're becoming more visible. And we want to connect all of the schools who are teaching all of the languages in the United States, and share resources, advocate for these schools. So we have a series of things that we do. And we have a core team, which is on the next slide, of the coalition board. And these are people who have founded, you can see by their titles, have founded and are current directors or board members of community-based schools in Portuguese, Chinese, Czech and Slovak, Japanese, and German. And so we are all very involved and want to be very involved with you. Oh, and I want to say before I continue that we're very, very happy to be collaborating with Linda and the Global Seal, and with Avant. And this is a wonderful collaboration that is, well, bringing the schools a long way. And you can see how here we are together. So on the next slide, we work with language representatives who work with the schools that teach the languages listed on this slide. Just take a quick look at that. I know that some of the language representatives are in this webinar, the coalition language representatives, because I saw your names in the chat. So it's wonderful to be with you. And there are the languages that we're working with at this point. These are not all of the languages taught in community-based schools in the United States. So if you know of some community-based schools and you care about them and you don't see this language listed here, contact me. And maybe you would like to be a language representative or connect us with a language representative. My email is at the end of the slides. One of our goals is not only to connect all the schools, but to document all of the community-based heritage language schools. Joshua Fishman in the 1960s and 1980s talked about thousands of schools. And so there are many more schools than we've documented so far. But if you look on our website, you can see a map of all the schools that are documented, and you can always ask me or Tommy Lou, whose email is right there, if your school is there. And if it isn't, or schools you know about, we would love to document them. So please be in touch with us. We're making progress. We have an annual conference. And the last one was just wonderful. Linda was one of the speakers. You can go to the next one, Dawn. And Dawn, thank you for putting these things also in the chat. That's very helpful. But the slides will be available as well. Anyway, we just had our conference October 7th and 8th, and it was really fabulous, and people loved participating. We do it both on site and online now. And as I mentioned, Linda was there and doing a whole workshop with community-based school people. Our next one, there you can see, is October 13 and 14. So put that on your calendar, and I'll show you how, I'll tell you in a minute how you can be in touch with us. And the next slide, we also, we have a Facebook page which you can visit and stay up to date. Oh, sorry, that's the conference webpage. You can see here that the recordings and the slides from the conference we just had are available on our website. We also had Jim Cummins as one of the speakers. Ophelia Garcia was one of the speakers. People from ACTFL were speakers. And we have, you can go on, Dawn, thank you. And we have a Facebook page where you can read about the conference also and stay up to date with what we're doing. And then the coalition website is the next slide, which Dawn has sent out. I just want to say that if you go to the coalition webpage and you go over to About Us on the top left-hand side, and you go to the bottom, you can click on newsletter. You can sign up to receive our newsletter, and then you'll be up to date on everything we're doing. We send it out about once a month, so it's not going to slam you or anything. And then the last slide just has my email. So if you want to connect in any way, please email me. And now I will turn it over to Linda, right? Yes, thank you. Thank you again. It's wonderful to be with all of you. Even though I can't see you, it's wonderful to be with you.
Thank you, Joy. Those of you who have questions for Joy, if you have questions about anything, you can put it in the chat and we'll get back with you on that. Linda, I am going to turn it over to you. I'm going to try and be really good and not touch anything so I don't mess the mouse up for you. So you have control of the mouse in just a second.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Joy. It's always been such a pleasure to work with the schools in the coalition. You're doing really good work and the idea isn't just to learn a language, but also the importance of sustaining these heritage languages. It's sustaining language diversity, and that's really important. So I'm really excited to be a part of that. And I know Dawn mentioned it, and certainly Joy just said something about the slides being available, but this will be recorded. So we're looking at this piece as really directing it to the audience of your parents, as well as the student, those that might engage with other student stakeholders, members of the community. And so, with that in mind, there may be something that we share that you've already heard, but I want you to know that this is going to be available. We really hope that you'll be able to share it. You can post it on your school website. And so that information continues to get out as parents become aware of the programs and what might be available for their own students. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. And let's see here. Do I have the mouse? Maybe not. So it says I'm controlling the screen, but let's see. There we go. Yay, it worked. All right. And so the Global Seal of Biliteracy, as well as the state seals, are recognitions of tools to document a student's language learning. And some of you may be familiar with the state seals of biliteracy. 49 of our 50 US states offer some kind of recognition. It is recognition typically for high school seniors, generally about the time they're going to graduate. And it generally will involve them taking a test. And that has sometimes been a challenge for our community-based schools, where they're learning the language in a community-based school on the weekends, and they're being recognized by their public school during the week. And so sometimes the communication there isn't great. And that's one of the things that we're working to improve. But if your student is in a state where they can qualify for a state seal, it's really important, because we want your language represented in those state numbers. And if there's an opportunity in some states for college credit or other options, you also want your students to take advantage of that. So we truly want you to participate in a state seal program if you have one. The Global Seal of Biliteracy is another opportunity for your students to be recognized. And this is testing that can be done in your local school and in over 130 different languages. So we really are working to support that language diversity. And the optimum opportunity would be for your students to earn both, because this is, when they begin to add 2 language certifications and recognition pieces onto their university applications, now that language is really the star and really the highlight of those applications. The other part is that they offer different kinds of benefits. And so your student can benefit in different ways from participating in both programs. And the Global Seal of Biliteracy could be earned earlier and is stackable, so that your students can actually earn 3 different levels of certification beginning in middle school. And so they may not have to wait to a high school senior to earn a recognition. And so that's something that's really important to think about. When you, as a parent or as a school administrator or a community member, thinking about language proficiency is something that takes time. And so the benefit of your community-based heritage programs is that you're starting generally with preschoolers or kindergartners, and they have a long period of time to really grasp the language, to use it, to have cultural opportunities. And what we find is that our heritage language learners typically achieve by middle school what some of our high school students don't achieve in a traditional language program at the high school until maybe they're a senior. And so it's really exciting that you have an opportunity to recognize those students for the years, the Saturday after Saturday investment that they've made. But it is a pathway, and we want you to think about how do you recognize and make the students aware of that pathway earlier. And so the idea of beginning with the end in mind is really important. So the student benefits from a seal of biliteracy is the first one is that it gives them a motivation to finish. And this is oftentimes the struggle for a community-based program when students, especially maybe when they get into high school, that they want to drop out and that maybe they don't feel like that the program is meeting their needs. But if they see that they can actually walk away with a credential or a certificate, it does become a retention tool to help your students stay engaged and excited so that they actually kind of finish their journey. And so some of the benefits for students that we see with a credential is certainly it gives them that benchmark to, to stay motivated in your program. But it also can be a way for them to distinguish themselves, whether it's a college application or a scholarship or a job. We see a number of universities highly interested in students that come with heritage languages because they can put them into advanced placement classes. They can provide them with some college credit. One of the universities that we're working with just published their pathway. And if a student comes with a global seal of biliteracy, they only need 1 year and they'll be able to earn that college minor in that language. And so there's lots of benefits to students and they're excited about those. So if we look at the state seal programs, this is the one, again, I mentioned all 49, but we're waiting on South Dakota to join. But this is where those programs are available, but they are not the same program in every state. And you'll see the website here, the globalseal.com /state resources. You can also find it under the resources tab, but there is an interactive map that will help you find your state and what its criteria is. These are just a few states, so you'll notice they each have their own emblem. It looks different. Some of them will have a different name. It's not always a seal of biliteracy. It might be called an endorsement or a certificate. It may go on the diploma. It may just go on the transcript. But in most cases, the state seal of biliteracy is awarded to high school seniors, and the school has to opt to participate. So that might mean that your public school, if the student's involved in a public school during the week, may not be participating in the state seal program. You can certainly encourage them to do that. But again, if that's the case, the global seal of biliteracy is still an option for you. Each state has different criteria. So the criteria for the global seal is the same everywhere in the world, but each state has its own criteria and their own the tests that they accept and so on. And so you'll just, to do that program, you'll want to work with your local public school because typically that's who's going to do the has to do the application process and the reporting for you. But it is possible, and I really encourage you to do that. To learn again about your state program, this is that interactive map on the globalseal.com's website, and it will actually take you to your state's information. There's a website where you can get more contact information if you are trying to find out more about a state program. But whether it's a state program or the global seal, there's things that you want to work with. And the first piece is, as a parent, you want to be able to talk to your school about the language that your student is learning outside of the traditional school program. That might be talking to their counselor, to an administrator, potentially to, for example, maybe a language teacher if they're in that program, and let them know. A lot of schools are more than willing to include languages not taught in the school, but they need to know that the student has the language, and oftentimes they don't know, so it just goes unrecognized. Typically, seal of biliteracy information is shared through the world language courses. So if your student isn't in one of those courses, they may not even be aware of that being an option. And so it's really important to have those conversations, both as a community school, but also as a parent that's advocating for your own students. The global seal of biliteracy is similar to the state seal in that it recognizes language skills. It recognizes them through testing. But otherwise, there's a lot of differences. And so the first difference is there is no age or grade limit. And so as soon as a student reaches the language skill required by the first level of certification, then they can test and they can be awarded that credential. The Global Seal is a certified seal, so it has a serial number on it, which has benefits to the students. It can be registered. It's also stackable, which means that they can earn all 3 levels as they continue in their language learning, their language experiences. And we encourage that. We want to award multiple certificates to students. It is available on both the ACTFL scale. This is the scale that's most common here in the United States, but also on the CEFR, or the Common European Framework of Reference, which is used in other international spaces. And as I mentioned earlier, it's available in over 130 languages. So hopefully we have the language that, that you teach and your students are learning. See if we can't get this to advance. There we go. The Global Seal has been awarded in all 50 states and the District of Columbia, but it's also been awarded internationally. So if you notice, wherever it is dark green, that is a place where the Global Seal of Biliteracy has been issued. If it is an olive or lighter colored green in that world map, these are places where we have certificates in process. So we're waiting for test scores, but we have schools that have applied from those countries. And so as you can see, it's a pretty exciting map that your students can become a part of. And the process is fairly simple. The school will apply on behalf of your students, and they will administer the testing. It's really important that the school do that in a neutral way. So there are test options where you can take a student could take a test from home, but it would then be proctored by another neutral, independent person. So parents are not allowed to be proctors if we want the state to accept the scores, and certainly if we want the Global Seal. We have to be sure that the test is given and taken by the individual that is being certified. But the Global Seal is free. Once you've paid, the school has paid for the test, or you've paid for the test of your choice, then the Global Seal process and certification is completely free. That's also true for the state seals as well. And the Global Seal will send those certificates directly to the school. They come with an embossed seal that represents the level that the student has achieved from one of those 3 levels of language certification. And the part of that serial number I shared earlier makes it really exciting for students to digitally share their certificate. So they can share it with a school, they can share it with an employer, some other kind of scholarship application. It also goes right on LinkedIn under licenses and certifications. So it is a working certificate. In fact, we have employers as well as several universities that award the Global Seal to their own students. And so it's really exciting that your student from your community-based school can be recognized in such a visible way. We also offer a new tool that is a language profile. This is to help students share their language skills in a way that makes sense to someone who's not necessarily knows what all of the language test scores mean. And so your student certificate appears with their name and their serial number. And then there is a description of what that means that the student is able to do in the language. So it really gives them a description of their skill level and what that means. And then the student can add their own language journey. So they might talk about growing up in a family where the language was spoken. They might talk about being able to visit grandparents in the summer and practice the language they're learning. They might share some other bits of culture, or just put a list of the different things that they've done with the language. And so again, we're providing these are free tools that the students can use to share what they've done in your language programs. And for those programs that start with younger learners that aren't yet to that level of certification, we really truly want to encourage and support that pathway so they begin with the end in mind. And so we do offer pathway ribbon awards that the school can use after they've tested younger language learners. And we have a passport where the student can sort of track their progress. And you'll notice that the passport pages are divided into quadrants, one for each of what we call the language learning domains. So speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And what's surprising to students, and maybe to you as parents, is your students will have strengths and some less or weaker areas. They will not be at the same level in all of those skills. So typically their listening might be really high. Maybe their writing, especially if they're a younger learner, would be quite low, but that's absolutely normal. And this is going to be a way for students to visualize not just where they are on that language journey, but also, the progress that they've made. And so it does involve a test, whether it's a state seal or a global seal. And there's lots of different ways to prepare. So one of those is a free self-assessment that is offered by the Global Seal. These are just using emojis for students to decide whether that's a task that they're able to do or not. And at the end, they get a free little assessment. And there are 6 of these little mini tests. And at the end, again, they would get a score that says you're likely to be in this area. So that's something as an adult, if you're interested in testing, you can do the same. In fact, we'd encourage you to be a role model and to do that. When, and I know that Dawn is going to talk more specifically about this, but when you are looking for that, when you have that test that you've decided, make sure to prepare your students for the test. And by that, I don't mean practicing a bunch of different answers. I mean, helping them understand what the format of the test is like, what kind of, if it's on a computer delivery with a keyboard or some other kinds of tools, those are going to be important pieces for them to at least know what's expected of them, like how to use the microphone. Maybe they've not done that before. And so these are things you want them to become familiar with. And after that test, look for, some of our tests, like the one that Dawn is going to share with you, has a really great visual for the students to get their score report. It's going to, again, and this is a typical student who has strengths and weaknesses. Their skills, listening, reading, speaking, and writing are not all the same, but they're going to be coached with, this is what you did to earn the score, and here are some ways to improve. And so, we want students to not just walk away with a score, but that it is what we call assessment for learning. It's giving them feedback on what to do next and how to improve. And as a parent, you want to take this score report and help your student understand, what does it mean? And maybe these are things that we practice at home. So that they get that additional support. And that's a role that you as a parent are able to do. Some other things that you can do as a parent. Your student has contact time with your community-based school, just maybe one day a week, likely for only a few hours. So what can you do to help support your students in working with that heritage language? Well, the first thing you can do is have conversations and provide other speakers in your community for them to have conversations with. So really encourage that. If you are not in a community that speaks your language, then look for some other ways to contact people from your home country, whether that's through email, that's a writing tool, so students can practice with their writing, or with Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, whatever, some kind of video chat forum, so that they can actually practice the language with people, not just their teacher. Frequently, students are very accustomed to the language their teacher uses, but maybe a different speaker, maybe a male speaker instead of a female. That changes things. And when they take a test, they're going to hear lots of different voices. So give them as much practice. The internet is a great source for reading material. It can be whether it's in entertainment or news or, the Twitter feed of their favorite singer. It can be any of those kinds of things that provide them with reading. And Netflix is a great tool. There are a lot of different languages available on Netflix. And there's also little apps that you can use to create vocabulary lists for your students, as well as looking at either the subtitles in English if they need that, or in the language that you're learning. And, do sports, do music, do other kinds of things in your language. Obviously right now, we're in FIFA season right now with the World Cup, and my granddaughters, my son-in-law actually got his subscription to Peacock in Spanish because it was only $8 to watch the World Cup. And so my granddaughter has been watching with him. And the other day they watched a game in English and she said, this isn't as much fun because they don't say goal forever and ever and ever. So, you have tools that are already tools you access and have. Just use them intentionally to help your students grow their language skills. And then as a community, there's also things you can do. So first of all, I want to say lead by example. If you have a language, show your students how important it is to get that language measured and tested. So if you have a language other than your first dominant language that you've acquired, maybe that's English, maybe it's something else you acquired in school, take the plunge, take the test. You'll learn something about how to share with your students about that. Make sure that you find people within, as you're a community member, volunteer in your community-based school. Give those students practice with the voice that they've not heard before. Plan cultural events around your language. Reading resources. Make sure that your language is represented at your local library. Donate some books in that language. And another thing you can do is just donate to the community school. Maybe help provide the cost of testing for students so that doesn't become a barrier to having a seal of biliteracy. And last but not least, my favorite thing to suggest to a community is to think about project-based learning, where you as a community that maybe has a business where that language is spoken, involve your community-based language learners in your business. Give them some tasks to do as interns or as volunteers or as workers that might help connect them perhaps to the home country and to others that use the language. And so with that, I just want to close with the resources that the Global Seal has specifically created for our heritage language schools on the Global Seal, about testing, how to communicate to a local public school about the test that may have been given in your heritage school, to make sure that they accept that test and can include your student in that state Seal of Biliteracy program as well. And so with that, I think we're at the check-in time.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you. I was trying to see if I could get the mouse back. Linda, we did have a question from one of our participants. It was Tiffany Chu. And Tiffany asks, she says she's the president of the National Association for Korean Schools, and that it's an organization known as Egnatz, and they are developing a Korean test that they're going to administer on an annual basis. And they were wondering, it's based on the ACTFL guidelines, if that would be a test that the Global Seal could award.
Well, at this, the Global Seal does regularly review tests, but our criteria, one of the criteria is that the test needs to be on the ACTFL scale based on the can-do statements, that it become a test that is a proficiency-based test. So not a fill in the blank, that kind of thing. Secondly, that the test be national or international in scope, so that it's something that is recognized by more than just a particular school or organization. So that may or may not be a challenge for your particular test. But and I see in the thing that is based on skill level, I understand that, but in terms of the nationally or internationally recognized and metered. So it's certainly something that you can, when you have that test, if that's something you do finish developing and you want to share it with us. But at this point, typically the test that's done by a single organization is not a test that our Board of Advisors has approved. So because we're dealing with tests that need to be recognized by employers internationally, that criteria, which is posted on our website, and under how were these tests selected, you're certainly welcome to look at that and get some ideas about maybe what might be needed to be included in that test to be accepted.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah.
And I did put a link to the page on the website about
Great.
tests, what tests are accepted. So Tiffany, that may be something you want to look into. And then if you have further questions, you can reach out to Linda after. I don't know if we had, I know Nick Gossett from Avant had shared some links in the chat as well about some sample pathways. And so yes, Jesse's asking if there are some sample tests somewhere, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in just a minute. So yes, there are some sample tests that you can go and look at and explore a little bit. So you guys who maybe have not checked the chat out yet, make sure you check out the chat. Don't worry if you don't know how to manipulate all the things, you know, during the webinar tonight. You will get a copy of the chat in a link that we're going to share with you tomorrow that will have all these links that were shared in the chat with you tonight. So just know that there's a lot of resources and materials there. What we're going to do next is I'm going to just share a little bit of information with you, some background like tips and tricks to kind of prepare you for taking a test. I don't know, Joy, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Oh, I just wanted to say that one thing that the community-based schools are so interested in, two things that tie in that Linda really did so well, and that is creating pathways that students can follow all the way from elementary school through middle and high school, and having the students be highly engaged throughout that time. And as you can imagine, as many of you know, this is very often a big challenge, because students have other things on Saturday or Sunday, whenever the schools are taking place. They go, I don't need to know this language. But Linda, what you said and the pictures that you showed and the activities that you described are so not only building proficiency and promoting engagement. And you see these highly engaged students. It's very, very encouraging. And I hope it's encouraging to the people who are participating. Thank you.
We also have a question from, it's in the Q&A. I don't know if you have seen it yet. It's from Russ Schugert from the American Translators Association. Are programs or initiatives in place to encourage SEAL earners to consider or pursue careers in language services, such as becoming professional translators or interpreters?
Well, I will answer that question. We do have some programs, some translator programs that are using or creating pathways for incoming students with their global seals of biliteracy to intern, and that global seal, because it is based on a proficiency level, comes with sort of a preliminary, I guess you could say, language skill screening. Obviously, translating and interpreting has other nuances in addition to just being able to use the language. But those students are incredibly, provide a great pipeline to those translating positions. And so please feel free to reach out to us, and, we can add you to that contact base, because these are things that, especially if there's, some of those less common languages, these are exactly those languages that are being studied in our heritage programs. So they can provide a great resource to you, and yet one more motivation that our schools can offer to our students to stick with it until they get to those higher levels of proficiency. So you also serve our community schools in that way. Thank you.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions or anything? We'll have some more time in just a minute.
Jesse Falcon asked a question. Are there sample tests somewhere that we can compare our test to?
Yes, and I'm going to talk about.
Oh, you're going to talk about that. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and get started. What I'm going to just share with you is some ideas for if you decide that you want to take the test, or that you want to prepare your child or your students in your school to take the test. What are some things that you want to consider so that you have a successful experience, but also so that you can really showcase what you really can do? So the examples that I'm going to talk to you about relate to the test that we offer through Avant. The test that qualifies for the seal for us that's used the most is our STAMP test, and it tests all 4 skills. And Linda did show you a picture just a few minutes ago that showed what a student report looks like, where it gives you feedback about your score, what you were able to do, and what you need to practice if you want to move up to the next level. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. I will say that one thing that we find very often is that our heritage learners don't always show what they can do on a proficiency test. And they are actually the ones who often can do the most, but they don't always show it. And so for those of you who are parents out there, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but sometimes I ask my child, like, how was your day? And the answer is, okay, it was fine. It's not a very, detailed response. He's fully capable of answering with much more than that. But heritage speakers often have the same kind of responses. They're very expedient in their answers. They get right to the point and they respond. And on a proficiency test, we want to see so much more than that. So even though it may not feel natural to give a lot of detail, we want you to give a lot of detail on a proficiency test. So here's some things to consider. Let's see. Ways to prepare. Use the language as much as possible. I know I'm guilty of this myself. I'm a French speaker, and I don't always speak French with my kids at home as much as I should. They both speak French, but I don't do it with them as much as I should. And it's because we kind of get pulled into the ebb and flow of English all around us every single day. But the more that you can use language at home, or in your work environment, or with your friends or your colleagues, if you're the one wanting to take the test, the more you can use it on a daily basis, the more ease and flow you're going to have in your responses. So use the language as much as possible. We also want to emphasize that being proficient does not mean you're perfect. Proficiency does not equate perfection. How well you can communicate doesn't mean how perfect you are in the language. I've made, I don't even know how many mistakes just since I've been talking to you a few minutes ago, but it doesn't mean that I'm not able to communicate in the language. So it's important for students or test takers to know they don't have to be perfect. They just have to be able to show how much, how well, how detailed they can communicate about something. Making a mistake is not going to create a pass-fail kind of scenario for them. So that's important, because some of the students who take this test that feel like they have to be perfect, they're scared to speak and they're scared to elaborate because they don't want to make a mistake. So don't be afraid. Proficiency is not perfection. The second thing is to go on and do a self-assessment. You can go on to the Global SEAL website, and there is a link on the Global SEAL website where you can do a mock self-assessment to kind of see where you think you may be. This will give you the opportunity to get a feel for the kinds of things that you need to be able to do at each level. And we also have sample tests on our website as well. I think I have that link coming up in a minute. So this is something that's a really good way for you to kind of gauge a little bit ahead what you can do in the language and what you need to know to be able to do. It will also allow you to see the can-do statements, the necessful, actful, can-do statements, and the actful performance descriptors. This will help you see what kinds of things the test is going to be looking for at each proficiency level. And when you know what your target is for your SEAL, that you're going to know that's exactly what I need to be able to do. So you can take the self-assessment, get a feel for what you know before you actually take the real test. This will allow you to set some goals for yourself. Let's say that you really want to get professional fluency instead of functional fluency. By looking at where you need to practice, which skills and which levels you need to really begin to practice, that will help you know what you need to be doing to be ready so you can get the level, the results that you're looking for. The other thing is to make sure you're practicing all 4 skills. To get the SEAL, you have to show competency in all areas, not just in one. And Linda mentioned earlier, we're not all going to be competent or proficient to the same degree in every skill, and that's okay. But you do have to have a minimum level of intermediate mid across all levels, and then anything above that. So you have to make sure that you are able to function and perform in all 4 skills: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. So you want to make sure you practice as much as possible. Linda gave a lot of great examples for how you can engage with native speakers or authentic materials so that you can really show what you can do in all 4 skills. In practicing those 4 skills, this is just an image to give you an idea. On the left, you see the levels, like level 1, 2, 3, 4 is novice low, novice mid, novice high, and so on. The more you practice the skills, you can think of it as you're building your foundation in the language. And so you want to have a lot of variety of the 4 skills in your practice, and you want to have lots and lots and lots of it so you have a strong foundation in the language. So the more opportunity you can practice, the better you're going to do on the test. A few other things to think about when you're actually taking the test is you want to try to be as detailed as possible. Like I was saying earlier, you don't want to give a short response just because you think it's the right response. You want to give an elaborated, detailed response as much as possible. The more that you can elaborate and give details and make sure that you're giving the kinds of details that are going to make the message more clear. Clarity is really critical in how that sample that you give is going to be rated. You want to make sure it's clear. You want to make sure that it's complex. The deeper your response can be, the higher your score is going to be. So if you give a really short, 2-word phrase versus a short paragraph that maybe has a lot of details and descriptors of where, when, why, what, who, all of those things described in that paragraph, that's going to get you a higher score. Make sure that you're creating a picture that the person who's going to be rating this sample that you give them, they can visualize it. They can almost imagine they're there. That is going to be a response that's clear, that's deep, that has lots of detail, and they're going to be able to know all the things about the message you're trying to share. That's really critical. I cannot emphasize that enough because that will really boost your score. When you're thinking of reading and listening, it's very possible the higher you go in the levels that the text or what you're listening to will get very complex. You don't have to understand every single word. Using clues, kind of like when you're reading, you use context clues to kind of figure out the meaning of words that you don't understand. You're going to do the same thing for listening as you would for reading in that sense. You want to think about what do you understand so that you can create meaning out of what you do understand in the text or in what you're hearing. And then how does what you understand relate to something else that you might know about the subject that you're reading about? Are there any visual clues? Especially at the lower levels of proficiency, a lot of the questions that you'll be asked may come with a picture or a sound that you may see or hear. So you want to be able to use all those clues to create meaning. You might also, at the higher levels, have to use strategies of inferencing, meaning the answer may not be stated in the text or said in what you're hearing. It might be something you have to inference and figure out that it was there in that text. That might be the answer. Those are some of the levels that are going to be higher levels. And a lot of heritage speakers are going to be having really high listening and reading. And so that's probably a skill they need to be practicing. And also being able to use different tenses at the higher levels. You have to be able to understand and use different tenses, different time frames. The more frequently you can do that to create a clearer picture, the higher you're going to score. This one is simple, but highly effective. Do not use English. On the stamp test, when someone uses English, that English word acts as a period, which is going to fragment that sentence. And so it's a hard stop. So if I were to say a sentence, and in the middle of that sentence, I can't think of the word in my language, and I use English, that's going to be a hard stop, like it's the end of the sentence. So trying to use a strategy we call in the language world circumlocution. It's like where you talk around something until you get your meaning across. I do this all the time. If I can't think of a word, I describe all the things I can describe to get that word across. That's a way better strategy to use than just throwing an English word in there, because the English word is going to be a hard stop. So don't use English on any of your responses. Another thing is take a risk. If you are you're a type A person who doesn't ever like to make mistakes, you got to take a risk on a proficiency test, because proficiency is not perfection, right? So you want to try and put as many words and ideas together so that you're not repeating the same sentence over and over. If you want to describe food that you like, and you say, I like apples, I like oranges, I like bananas, I like pineapples, and you're just saying I like, and then changing the food that you like, that really is like one sentence. You know how to make one sentence with a lot of different words. So you want to try to create with as much variety as you can, okay? And try not to be repetitive. So take a risk and try to put some things together. Even if it feels scary, that's better than just repeating the same simple thing over and over and over. And last but not least, taking the sample test is really, really helpful. The Avant stamp test is a test that's adaptive. And so what this means is that when you take the test, it's going to give you harder questions if you are showing that you're doing really well in reading or listening, it's going to be like, wow, they're very proficient. Let's give them something harder. Let's give them something harder. And so the test is going to progressively get harder or easier depending on how your responses are being rated. If you're struggling to answer, they're going to get a little easier. Ideally, you're going to end the test right at the level where you're most proficient. So the reading and listening is going to help the test know what to give you as a prompt for writing and speaking. Now, it's important to know that's what the real test is going to do for you. The sample test is just a sampling. It's not going to be adaptive. It is going to give you a sampling of all the levels. So if you take the sample test and you keep getting harder and harder questions, don't freak out. It's okay. It's just a sample test to give you an idea of what the questions or what the text or what the audio is going to be like on the real test. But on the real test, it's not going to ask you to do things that you just cannot do. It's going to find where you are and then build from there, okay? You can go to this website, the avantassessment.com/sample test, and you can choose your language and take the sample test. That'll give you a feel for what it's going to feel like. Okay, so these are some things for you to think about if you want to take a proficiency test. And I really encourage you to, if you speak another language, you really should try to go for a global seal and model that for your learners. So the benefits are that you can set your goals and achieve them by practicing and reaching that target. You can get credentialed, and then you can be a model for your students, and your students can be better prepared to be global citizens. Okay, those are some tips for you. Okay, any questions or anything to anyone want to have any questions that you came up for Linda or for me or for Joy as we wrap up this evening? I did put Linda's contact information in the chat for you guys. Someone had asked for Linda's contact information, so that is in there for you. And I'm also going to post a link for you all for the survey. If you would take the survey, you're actually, when you leave the webinar, you'll be prompted to take the survey as well. But if you want to save the survey and take it later, that's okay too. But the survey is going to help us know if this was helpful, what other things you would like to learn or know more about. And if you have questions that we need to reach out to you about after the webinar, that will also give us that information. Okay. Anyone, if you have any questions, please.
I'd like to ask the community-based schools, people who are on here, does this work for you? Do you see a path forward with this? What are the challenges that you're still facing? Because we want this to work, not only for public and private schools, but for community-based schools. And we want the students in these schools to get credit. So are you good? I mean, can a couple of you tell us, are you in good shape? Are you ready to go? Are you going? Do you have challenges? I guess hopefully this is working for you. I mean, we're very, very grateful to Linda and Dawn and Avant and Global Seal and State Seal for these opportunities that you're creating, and you just continue to work on this nonstop and make it better and better all the time. I wanted to ask, sorry, Dawn, are there, like, you're talking about answering fully, and I really love that answer, because we live in a society right now where it's kind of said that we don't say much. Be brief, be brief, be brief, be succinct.
You
Don't
answer in
say a lot.
acronyms in a text message, right? You don't
Right.
even write the full words out anymore.
Right, right. And I've been in so many situations where a person kind of talks longer than you sort of thought maybe they should have, and everybody's kind of going, so this talking more is a kind of maybe not even in our culture right now. Do you have like video? Oh, good. We've got a thank you. Thank you, Jesse. We'll get to you in a second. Do you have some videos of students answering questions that people can look at and say, okay, there's a good answer?
We have writing exemplars in every language that we offer the test in on our site. So if you want to see, for example, a novice high response, and you want to see a novice high response in whatever language, in Russian, you can go and look at novice high, and it'll give you exemplars of this is what would be a novice high response in Russian. This is what would be a novice high response in Spanish. This is what an advanced low response would look like. So you can get an idea. Those are really helpful for teachers and for students to know if your target is intermediate mid or intermediate high, what does that look like? The descriptors tell you what it is, but in reality, like, what does an actual student response look like? And you'll notice they're not perfect. They're not perfect. But it will give you a really good visualization of what to expect.
The other thing I would add to that is we're looking for those sort of long answers, but we're also looking for them to think about them. I always say, the first thing is, what can you say? Can you do a task? Can you answer a question? The second part of it is, how well can you answer the question? How thoroughly? And then with what kind of organization? So if, for example, someone's going to answer something about their family, they could make a mini paragraph out of each member of their family, but start with an opening, I have a great family, and then close it with, now that you know everything about my family, do you have, and I think part of that is, it is something that the teachers and parents can help students do. Because this is the only sample that someone has to determine how much language the student has acquired. And, they can't read their mind and think about what they could have done. They can only see what rate the sample that is in front of them that day. And so it is coaching students to answer as fully as they can with as many fancy words. Part of it is when we think about the advanced levels of language, and we see a lot of our heritage language learners performing at that level, it's measuring academic language. So you almost want them in writing to be like a small essay, to think about it in those terms, not just as a brief text message. And I think, or if they were giving a formal presentation. So you want those higher levels, when we talk about that advanced and upper intermediate, it's academic. We're trying to make it, they need to look polished. And I think, so it's how much they can say, how well they can say it, and with what kind of organization. So those are the ways that I always coached my own students to do well on these kinds of tests.
We do have a few. We do have
helpful.
a few comments and questions too that I don't want us to miss.
Right.
Jessie did comment that she works for a tribal government and community, and she has something like community-based schools, but she doesn't know how that could be recognized. And we also have a question about homeschooling. So Linda, do you want to talk about, if they're not able to go through a public school to be tested, what are their options?
Well, I would always encourage, if they're in a heritage-based program, that the heritage school do the testing, because then they become the gateway. to both potentially a state seal, but certainly to the global seal. But if you are alone out there learning your language, or your child is, then the global seal does have an individual application procedure. You can actually have request a test referral, and then we take the test scores. Instead of having them being submitted to the global seal by the school, they are actually submitted to us by the test company, so we can verify their validity and that the scores are the ones that the student actually earned. And in those cases, the test can be done online at home, but through an independent, neutral proctor. So someone is watching the student take the test, so that they know that there's no cheating happening, or no assistance being given to the student. But those are possibilities. That does not, again, access and equity are the two pieces that we're really trying to be sure that we do for students here.
Yes. Jessie also says she would like to have their program develop into a heritage language community school. How do they go about getting that recognized as such? So that's a question for Joy.
Yeah, Jessie, can you contact me and we can be in touch? I'm going to put my email in the chat, because I would like to be in touch with you, and we are actually trying very hard to be in touch with and to advocate for Native American language schools, indigenous language schools, whatever you call them. We want to be, so if you and I can interact, because I have thoughts about that. I definitely want to interact with you. Then this is there was a question here about, now I can't see it anymore. Oh, it was in the chat. About how do the community-based schools, they want to be that honored by the public schools. Somebody said that in the chat, but I can't get back to the chat. Do you see that, Dawn? Somebody asked, how can we, the community, how can we
the program develop into a
by the
community
public?
How do we go about getting recognized as such?
Yes. Oh, well, that was the indigenous language schools. How can we be recognized as a community-based school? And I'll talk with her about that. But the other question was, how can we in a community-based school have the students' proficiency recognized in a public school? Okay, now I can find it. I would like to have our program development. Oh, no. Sorry, where is it?
I think it was.
Oh, it's Tiffany. We like to get credit for our program from a public school. We need your advice to do that. Did you answer that already, Linda?
Well, it's part of what we've talked about a little bit, and then some of those resources that are on our heritage language page have a lot of different ideas about how to do that, but it really is articulation. They need to know, first of all, that you exist. Secondly, they need to know that if you are testing, that you're using nationally and internationally recognized tests. They need to know the testing situation, because what you're asking for is recognition of something that the public school didn't give, and they need assurances that the test is valid. And so, I think that's why we've tried to create those pieces and suggestions on how to test when that happens. And any of these national tests that are being recognized for the global or state seal, such as the Avant tests, they come with guidelines on how to administer the test. And so when you're following those guidelines, those are the same guidelines the school would use, but they just need to know that you're aware of them. They may otherwise just have a misconception that, the child is taking the test with mommy sitting there next to them, helping them, and they don't know, and that's not allowed. So we just need to, it's about really articulation and helping them understand the formality of the test and the seriousness with which you take it.
And there are options for taking the test and having it proctored. virtually as well. So, especially if you are in a situation where you don't have a way to figure out how to do it through the school, or you don't have anyone to proctor it on site, there are ways for the Avant tests to have them proctored for you and the results shared that way. So that's also an option that's available as well. We also have Michelle.
Yeah,
Michelle,
Tiffany, was that, I wanted to know if that was helpful to Tiffany. Was it helpful, Tiffany? Just put it in the chat, or is there anything else you'd like to know? Sorry, and Jesse, is it good for us to connect? Okay, go ahead, Dawn.
I was just going to say, Michelle had shared a few comments as well that I want to make sure no one misses. Yes, thank you, Tiffany. Michelle said that many of the public school districts in Washington have accepted results from community-based language schools or programs, that you can also work with your state supervisor for world languages and helping get that through. And that's, you need to make sure you're using a test that's approved for the state seal if you're going to go through the school as well. So yes, and in some
Michelle
places they can get credits as well. They can get competency-based credits in some cases, depending on what the state has approved. Mm-hmm.
And then Michelle added, private and homeschool students are not able to earn the state seal of biliteracy, but they can earn the global seal. Michelle, do you mean private school students? Like a private school? I thought private and public schools were on the same status, but maybe I'm
It
wrong.
depends from state to
No?
state.
Okay, Linda, no. Oh, okay.
It depends from the states. There's many states where it's only public schools, and only those public schools that have opted to participate. So it's not every school, unfortunately.
Yeah.
There are some states that have allowances or pathways for private schools. But if the private school isn't included, then the articulation, if they can have the public school accept the test that they gave, which is the autonomy is there in the public school. It's up to them if they want to or not. Then that becomes then an alternate pathway for them.
Mm-hmm.
But Global Seal is always available, so they can get one or both anyway.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, and actually, I think I know in a lot of districts that I work with, I encourage them to go for both. I mean, why not? Let's celebrate the success of these students having proficiency. If you're going to get a state seal and you qualify for the global seal, get both. Get both of them. The global seal, the benefit of having that in addition to the state seal is you also are able to continue that forward. So beyond high school, if you get a certain level of a global seal and you want to get the next level up, you're not limited by, oh, well, I've already graduated. That's as far as I can go. You can continue that proficiency growth or getting recognized for that proficiency growth. Yes. So do we have any other questions or comments? And thank you, Michelle, for sharing. We saw your answers. It's all good. It's all good. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. And this is recorded, and so we'll be sharing this out. We'll be sharing it out on our YouTube channel. So when you'll get an email from us tomorrow, and it will have a link to where you can go and find the YouTube link tomorrow. So if you know someone that this would be helpful, please feel free to share the link to the YouTube, to the video. And I know Joy and all the coalition schools and part of the community with the coalition schools will be sharing out the link as well. But if you all come up with questions or you need help or support in any way, all of our contact information is also available through the resources that you'll get in your email tomorrow as well. So please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help. And Joy and Linda, thank you so much for partnering with us.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Linda. And thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to be with you and see your questions and your comments. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.